Nicolae Ceaușescu was born on the 26th of January in the year 1918 in the village of Scornășești, located in Alt County in southern Romania. He was the third of 10 children in a poor peasant family. His father Andruda was known for being strict and authoritarian, and his mother Alexandrina raised her children with discipline and religious values. Life in the countryside was difficult, and the Ceaușescu family worked hard in agriculture to make ends meet. Nicolae grew up in poverty, surrounded by hardship, and from an early age he showed signs of being stubborn, ambitious, and determined to rise above his condition. He had little formal education, and at the age of 11 he moved to Bucharest, where he began working as a shoemaker apprentice. It was during this period that he was introduced to leftist and communist ideas that were spreading among workers in Romania. Romania in the early 20th century was a kingdom under King Carol II, with deep social divisions between the peasantry and the elite. Industrialization had created new working classes, and communism attracted many young people who felt exploited by the system. Nicolae Ceaușescu was drawn to the underground communist movement, which was illegal at the time. He joined the Romanian Communist Party in his teenage years, becoming an active member in demonstrations and union activity. His fiery speeches and dedication to the cause made him a target for the authorities. In 1933, when he was just 15 years old, he was arrested for the first time for distributing communist propaganda. This marked the beginning of a life frequently interrupted by imprisonment. Between 1933 and 1944, Ceaușescu was arrested several times for his political activity. He spent much of this time in prisons, where he met older communists, including George Dage, who would later become leader of Romania. Prison hardened him, and he built a reputation as a loyal and disciplined party member. During World War II, Romania was under the dictatorship of Marshal Ion Antonescu, who aligned with Nazi Germany. Communists were persecuted harshly during this period, and Ceaușescu once again found himself in prison. In 1944, however, when Romania switched sides and the Soviet Red Army entered the country, communists were freed and began gaining influence. With Soviet support, the Romanian Communist Party rose to power, and Nicolae Ceaușescu advanced quickly in its ranks due to his loyalty and reputation as a dedicated activist. He was appointed to the Central Committee and began building a network of influence. After the war, Romania came under Soviet domination, and communism became the official ideology of the state. Ceaușescu married Elena Petrescu in 1947, who would become his closest ally and partner in both private and political life. Elena was ambitious and desired influence, and together they presented themselves as a powerful couple. In the same year, King Nicolae of Romania was forced to abdicate, and the People's Republic of Romania was proclaimed, firmly placing the country under communist control. George Dage became the leader of the party and the country, while Ceaușescu gradually gained more important positions. He served as Deputy Minister of the Armed Forces, and he built strong ties with the military, an institution that would remain crucial throughout his career. He also worked on party organization and internal security, proving himself as a reliable and obedient functionary. The death of George Dage in 1965 created an opportunity for Ceaușescu. By this time he had become a trusted figure within the party, known for his discipline and loyalty. After some political maneuvering, he was chosen as the General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, the highest position of power in the state. From that point, he began to consolidate his rule. In 1967 he became president of the State Council, and by 1974 he assumed the newly created position of President of Romania. He had successfully risen from a poor shoemaker's apprentice to the supreme leader of the country. In the early years of his rule, Nicolae Ceaușescu surprised many both inside and outside Romania. While he followed the communist model of centralized control, he sought to create a degree of independence from the Soviet Union. In 1968, when the Soviet Union and other Warsaw Pact states invaded Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring, Ceaușescu refused to participate and openly condemned the invasion. This bold act earned him admiration in the West, where he was seen as a nationalist communist willing to resist Soviet domination. Leaders from the United States, France, and Britain welcomed him, and Romania received foreign investment and loans. Ceaușescu promoted a form of Romanian nationalism within communism, emphasizing independence, national pride, and the unique identity of the Romanian people. For ordinary citizens, this initially created hope that his rule might bring greater freedom and prosperity. At the same time, Ceaușescu invested in industrialization and modernization. Massive construction projects began across the country, new factories were opened, and cities expanded. Education and health care were provided free of charge, and in the early period some Romanians experienced an improved standard of living compared to earlier times. Ceaușescu also promoted a strict foreign policy of independence, establishing relations with China and the developing world, and presenting Romania as a sovereign state that would not be a mere puppet of Moscow. His defiance made him a well-known international figure, and Western leaders often received him with honors, believing he could be a moderate force within the Eastern Bloc. However, behind this outward image, Ceaușescu was steadily building one of the most repressive regimes in Europe. He expanded the powers of the Securitate, the Romanian secret police, which became one of the largest and most invasive security organizations in the world. Surveillance, censorship, and repression were widespread, and any form of dissent was crushed. Ceaușescu and Elena cultivated a cult of personality, presenting themselves as the father and mother of the nation. Their portraits were placed in every institution, and citizens were required to participate in mass rallies praising them. Schools taught loyalty to the leader, and the media broadcast constant propaganda. By the 1970s, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were no longer seen as ordinary politicians but as figures elevated to almost mythical status. The obsession with grand projects became another feature of Ceaușescu's rule. He launched a massive systematization program aimed at reshaping Romanian towns and villages according to communist modernist ideals. Entire villages were demolished, historical churches and monuments were destroyed, and soulless apartment blocks replaced traditional homes. The most notorious project was the construction of the Palace of the People in Bucharest, one of the largest administrative buildings in the world. It required the demolition of a large part of the historic city and consumed enormous resources, while ordinary people faced shortages of food, heating, and basic goods. By the late 1970s, Romania had borrowed heavily from Western banks to finance industrialization and modernization. Initially, this influx of foreign credit allowed for rapid development, but when the global economic crisis struck and oil prices rose, Romania's economy faltered. Ceaușescu decided to repay all foreign debt as quickly as possible, a policy that led to extreme austerity. He ordered massive exports of food and goods to earn hard currency, leaving Romanians with empty shelves and a declining quality of life. Electricity was rationed, heating was restricted, and people spent hours in lines to buy basic necessities. Malnutrition, infant mortality, and poverty increased drastically, and resentment toward the regime grew. Still, propaganda insisted that Romania was thriving under the wisdom of the leader. In the 1980s, the dictatorship of Nicolae Ceaușescu became harsher as the economic situation worsened. He enforced strict controls on daily life and sought to maintain absolute power through repression and propaganda. The secret police, known as the Securitate, monitored millions of Romanians. Informers were present in workplaces, schools, and even within families. People lived in fear of being reported for careless remarks. Dissent was not tolerated, and even minor criticism could lead to interrogation, imprisonment, or worse. The cult of personality expanded further, with books, songs, and television programs dedicated to praising Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. They were referred to as the genius of the Carpathians and the mother of the nation, and their birthdays were celebrated as national holidays. The family of Nicolae Ceaușescu became deeply embedded in the ruling system. Elena Ceaușescu gained high political positions despite having little formal education. She was made deputy prime minister and held influence over scientific and academic institutions, where she was presented as a great chemist and intellectual. Their children also occupied privileged positions in the state. The entire regime began to revolve around the family, creating resentment among citizens and officials alike. While the people suffered food shortages, electricity blackouts, and lack of medical supplies, the Ceaușescu family lived in luxury, with access to imported goods, fine clothing, and private residences. This contrast deepened the anger of ordinary Romanians. Ceaușescu continued to pursue his grand visions for Romania. He dreamed of transforming Bucharest into a model socialist capital. The construction of the Palace of the People continued, consuming resources and forcing many to live in poor conditions. Thousands of homes were demolished to make way for wide boulevards and monumental buildings. At the same time, his systematization program threatened rural traditions, as entire villages were slated for destruction and peasants were ordered to move into concrete apartment blocks. These policies alienated people in both cities and the countryside, but open opposition remained dangerous. Internationally, Ceaușescu tried to maintain his image as an independent communist leader. He continued to oppose certain Soviet policies and sought relations with Western countries. Romania maintained diplomatic ties with the United States and Israel, unusual among Warsaw Pact states. However, by the 1980s Western governments became aware of the severe human rights abuses and worsening economic situation inside Romania. The image of Ceaușescu as a nationalist reformer faded, replaced by condemnation and criticism. Reports of food shortages, lack of heating, and repression of dissent reached the outside world, and Romania became increasingly isolated. One of the most controversial aspects of his policies was the attempt to control population growth. In 1966 Ceaușescu had issued Decree 770, which banned abortion and contraception in order to increase the Romanian population. This measure led to thousands of unwanted pregnancies, overcrowded orphanages, and many deaths from unsafe illegal abortions. Women were subjected to regular medical checks to ensure compliance, and families with many children were praised as patriotic. While the birth rate initially rose, the long-term effects were tragic, with many children abandoned in state institutions that became notorious for neglect and abuse. By the 1980s these policies had created immense suffering and tarnished the regime further. Despite the hardships, Ceaușescu maintained strict control. He traveled the country giving speeches where crowds were forced to cheer and wave flags. Television broadcast endless footage of his visits to factories, schools, and villages, showing him as a tireless leader devoted to the people. But beneath the surface, resentment grew. Intellectuals, workers, and ordinary citizens all experienced frustration. Yet the fear of the Securitate prevented organized opposition from forming. Romania remained one of the most repressive states in Eastern Europe. The turning point came in December 1989. Across Eastern Europe that year, communist regimes were collapsing as the Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev allowed reforms and withdrew support for authoritarian rulers. In Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia, communist governments fell peacefully. In Romania, however, Ceaușescu refused to yield. On December 16, protests erupted in the city of Timișoara after the government attempted to evict a dissident Hungarian pastor named Laszlo Tokes. Local people gathered to support him, and soon large crowds demanded freedom and an end to dictatorship. The security forces responded with violence, opening fire on demonstrators. Many were killed or wounded, but the protests did not stop. News spread across the country, and outrage grew. Ceaușescu and Elena attempted to control the situation. On December 21, he organized a mass rally in Bucharest, intending to demonstrate popular support for his rule. The event was broadcast live on television. At first the crowd chanted as ordered, but soon boos and shouts of anger broke out. For the first time in decades, the people defied him openly, and the cameras captured his shocked and confused expression. The rally collapsed into chaos, and the myth of his absolute control was shattered. From that moment, the regime rapidly disintegrated. Fighting broke out between loyalist forces and protesters across Romania. Army units began to defect to the side of the demonstrators, unwilling to fire on their fellow citizens. The Securitate tried to resist, but their authority collapsed under the pressure of mass revolt. On December 22, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu fled Bucharest by helicopter as angry crowds stormed the party headquarters. Their attempt to escape failed, as the army forced their helicopter to land. They were captured and held in custody. The new provisional leadership, the National Salvation Front, decided to put the Ceaușescus on trial. On December 25, 1989, they faced a summary military tribunal. The charges included genocide, undermining the national economy, and abuse of power. The trial lasted only a few hours, and the couple was denied the opportunity for a proper defense. Both Nicolae and Elena remained defiant, refusing to recognize the authority of the court. Nicolae insisted that he was still the president of Romania and refused to sign documents or acknowledge guilt. Elena shouted at the judges and guards, showing no remorse. The verdict was death by firing squad. Within minutes of the sentencing, the Ceaușescus were led outside and executed by a group of soldiers. The scene was filmed, and images of their lifeless bodies were broadcast worldwide, marking the dramatic and violent end of the last communist dictatorship in Eastern Europe. Romania was the only country in the region where the fall of communism turned into a bloody revolution. The death of Nicolae Ceaușescu ended more than 2 decades of authoritarian rule. His legacy remains deeply controversial. Some remember his early defiance of Soviet domination and his attempts to industrialize the country. Others recall only the repression, shortages, and fear that defined daily life under his dictatorship. The grand projects he built, such as the Palace of the People, still stand as reminders of his obsession with monumental displays of power, even as ordinary citizens suffered. Historians continue to debate his rule. On one side, his foreign policy of independence gave Romania a unique position during the Cold War. On the other side, his domestic policies created immense suffering and isolation. The cult of personality surrounding Nicolae and Elena, the intrusive power of the Securitate, the economic hardship, and the brutal end all combined to make his dictatorship one of the most infamous in modern European history. From a poor village boy in Scornăsesti to the self-proclaimed genius of the nation, Nicolae Ceaușescu climbed to the peak of power and fell with extraordinary speed. His life symbolized the extremes of 20th-century totalitarianism, where one man could shape the destiny of millions through ambition, propaganda, and repression. The Revolution of December 1989 not only ended his rule but also marked the final collapse of the communist order in Eastern Europe, ushering Romania into a new and uncertain chapter of its history.